Stacy Zoltara was in her office in downtown San Francisco when she received a text message from her 16-year-old daughter. "I'm scared," her daughter wrote. Many of her daughter's classmates at Berkeley High School were preparing to leave their desks and file into the halls as part of a planned walkout in protest of Israel. And this was on October 18th, just 11 days after the massacre of October 7th. Stacy told her daughter to wait in her classroom and just breathe. She tried to project a sense of calm, but as she was in the midst of sending that text to her daughter, she received an influx of text messages herself from panicked Jewish parents whose children were inside the school. As she learned from those text messages, the genocidal chant "From the river to the sea" was being recited very openly and very freely in the halls of Berkeley High School. Students were actively threatening to commit acts of violence against Jews, and Jewish students throughout the school were in tears. Parents were frantically texting each other about where in the school their children could hide should violence actually erupt. Some of you may have read that story this past week. It was featured in the lead article in this month's edition of The Atlantic, a very important and very disturbing article by the Jewish journalist Franklin Foer called "The Golden Age of American Jews is Ending." In his article, Franklin Foer gives an excellent synopsis of the history of American Jewry since the end of the Holocaust. And he reminds us that since World War II, Jews in the United States have been living through a golden age to rival the golden age of Jews in medieval Spain. For decades, Jews weren't merely accepted in American society, Jews actually shaped American society. In the 20th century, America's sense of style was defined by a yeshiva bacher named Ralph Lifshitz, who later became Ralph Lauren. For years and years and years, America's leading authority on sex was a Jewish grandmother named Dr. Ruth. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, was America's leading moral voice. And most tellingly, in the year 2000, Joe Lieberman, a Shabbat-observant Orthodox Jew, fell 537 votes short of becoming vice president of the United States. But since the year 2000, a year that was arguably the peak moment for American Jews, things have shifted radically in this country. As we all know far too well, anti-Semitism in the United States has exploded on both the right and the left over the past 7 years especially, but particularly since October 7th. And as Franklin Foer writes in the concluding words of his article, "The forces arrayed against Jews on both the right and the left are far more powerful than they were 50 years ago. If America persists on its current course, it would be the end of the golden age, not just for Jews, but also for the country that nurtured them." Everything that Franklin Foer wrote in that article was confirmed for us here at Temple Beth Shalom last Thursday, when we were privileged to hear from Rabbi David Levy, the New Jersey Regional Director of the American Jewish Committee. Rabbi Levy shared with us the findings from the AJC's 2023 survey on the state of anti-Semitism in America. And that survey was opened on October 5th, and it was active for exactly one full day before October 7th. The AJC closed their survey after October 7th, but they reopened it 10 days later on October 17th. So really, it is the first major survey to take into account the effects of October 7th on American Jewish life. And I want to share some of the findings from that survey with you now. 93% of American Jews believe that anti-Semitism is a serious problem in the United States. 93%. 1 in 5 American Jews feels unsafe when they attend an event at a Jewish institution, including their own synagogue, which means that 1 in 5 of you right now probably feel uncomfortable just being in this room. 25% of American Jews reported being the personal targets of anti-Semitism over the past year. That's 1 in 4 Jews in this country. And 78% of American Jews report feeling less safe in the United States in the months following October 7th. And all of that information really confirms Franklin Foer's conclusion in that very disturbing article. Maybe the golden age of American Jewry really is coming to a close. But here's where Franklin Foer's article and Rabbi Levy's presentation diverged. Rabbi Levy told us that the most important statistics in the AJC study came not from the Jewish respondents to the survey, but actually from the non-Jewish respondents to the survey. 3 in 4 Americans, not Jews, not Jewish Americans, but Americans, understand that anti-Semitism in this country is a serious problem. 56% of American adults acknowledge that anti-Semitism in the United States has increased dramatically over the past 5 years. And 92% of Americans, 92%, a staggering number, believe that anti-Semitism affects American society as a whole and that everyone is responsible for combating it, not just Jews, but all Americans. In other words, the general public maybe is finally waking up. Americans are finally beginning to understand that there is something very, very wrong in our country, and it is every American's responsibility to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism. The vast majority of Americans, 92%, understand that anti-Semitism is a problem and that it is everyone's responsibility to solve it. And as bleak as things may feel at this moment, our future is not hopeless. In fact, I think it's precisely the opposite. There's real reason to hope because there are millions of Americans, the majority of this country, who understand that anti-Semitism is a deep and pervasive problem and that it's a problem that can only be solved together. Tonight, following the conclusion of Shabbat, we will be celebrating Purim and we'll be reading the Megillah, the book of Esther. And what I've been thinking about most in the days and weeks leading up to Purim this year is the fact that it wasn't actually Esther or Mordechai who saved the Jewish people. Ultimately, it was Achashverosh, a non-Jewish Persian king who overturned Haman's plot to annihilate the Jews of Persia. Yes, it's true, Esther, his Jewish queen, implored him to do it, but she needed his help. She couldn't save her people on her own, because people can't really save themselves on their own. The rabbis of the Talmud teach, Ein chavush matir atzmo mi beit ha'asurim. A prisoner cannot free himself from prison, but rather he relies upon the compassion of others to release him from his chains. And in a beautiful midrash in the Talmud, the rabbis teach that when Esther approached Achashverosh to ask him to save her people, an angel was present in the throne room. And that angel miraculously stretched out Achashverosh's golden scepter so that Esther could reach out and touch it, and so that she would know that the king's compassion would be extended both to her and to her people. And the most important piece of that teaching is that the rabbis tell us that the very same miracle, the exact same miracle, happened to Bat Paro, to Pharaoh's daughter. As Pharaoh's daughter was reaching out to save Moses from the Nile River, her arms miraculously stretched out so that she could reach Moshe and draw him to the banks of the river. In other words, according to the rabbis, miracles occur whenever non-Jews endeavor to save Jewish lives. Or, to frame it slightly differently, it's a miraculous thing when non-Jews go out of their way to save Jewish people. Rabbi Levy concluded his talk last Thursday by telling us that he is the son of Holocaust survivors. And the only reason that his father survived the Shoah is because non-Jews helped his father at every possible opportunity, on every step along the way. And he told us one particularly chilling story that I want to share with you now. Somehow Rabbi Levy's grandfather was able to get tickets for his entire family to get on a train on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which would take them out of Nazi-occupied territory. And several hours into their journey on that train, the train stopped, and a group of Nazis got on board looking for Jews who were trying to escape. And one of those Nazis began to interrogate Rabbi Levy's grandfather. But as he was interrogating him and asking him questions, he saw that Rabbi Levy's grandfather was wearing a ribbon on his jacket, and that ribbon was from his unit in World War I. And as soon as the Nazis saw that, he immediately shifted his line of questioning, and he started asking him about his unit and what he did during the war. And then that Nazi leaned over to Rabbi Levy's grandfather and he whispered, "That was my unit too." And he then turned to his fellow Nazis on that train car and he said, "This family's okay. Let's move on." And he let them go. Rabbi Levi fully understands that if it were not for that one moment of compassion, he wouldn't be here today. And that is where hope can be found. If Achashverosh, or Pharaoh's daughter, or even an SS soldier can go out of their way to save Jewish lives, maybe there is a reason to hope. If 92% of American citizens believe that everyone is responsible for combating anti-Semitism, maybe the golden age of American Jewry is not ending as quickly as Franklin Ford thinks it is. I, for one, am very proud to say that in the days and weeks following October 7th, all of my clergy colleagues in Livingston, Christian, Hindu, and yes, Muslim, reached out to me to offer words of comfort and consolation and support. And they have continued to reach out in the months following October 7th. And we need them. We need every non-Jewish ally we can get at this extremely difficult and precarious moment for the Jewish people. Because as our tradition teaches, Ein chavush matir atzmo mi beta asurim, we cannot free ourselves from prison, but we depend on the compassion of others to release us from our chains. Shabbat Shalom. We turn to page 428 and we rise now for the beginning of the Musaf service.